The following program is brought to you by the University of Alabama.
After several volumes of fiction, Sina Jeter Naslund had her first great success with Ahab's Wife, the imaginative retelling of Melville's Moby Dick from the point of view of the sea captain's young spouse. Since then, she has published Four Spirits, about the Birmingham church bombing, Adam and Eve, a speculative novel set in the Garden of Eden in a futuristic Iraq, and Abundance, a novel based on the life of the much misunderstood French queen Marie Antoinette. In Abundance, the queen has a favorite painter, a young woman who does her portrait. This brilliant young artist, Elizabeth Lebrun, an actual figure at the court of Louis XVI, intrigued Naslund. What became of her? Did she survive the Reign of Terror? Did she marry, have children, grow old, continue her career? In her new novel, The Fountain of St. James Court, or Portrait of the Artist as an Old Woman, Naslund creates a kind of alter ego, the Louisville novelist Catherine Callahan, who writes her novel telling the painter's story and her own. I spoke with Sina Jeter Naslund in our studio in Reese Pfeiffer Hall on the campus of the University of Alabama. Sina, it is good to see you again.
Thank you so much, Don. It's always lovely to talk to you.
We do this from time to time because you keep producing novels and I keep liking them. Is this number 9 or 10?
This is number 9.
Number 9. The most recent one, Adam and Eve, was a futuristic, slightly unrealistic, imaginative, Dan Brown-ish novel. And it is a kind of standalone, but this one links to Abundance.
Yes.
The link for the Fountain of St. James Court goes back, leaps over Adam and Eve into
Yes.
Abundance.
Yes.
With the character of Emily, not Elizabeth. Elizabeth. Sorry,
Elizabeth Vigée Lebrun.
Elizabeth.
Yeah.
How does that work? Who was she in Abundance?
When I was researching Abundance, I naturally looked at portraits of Marie Antoinette by various painters. Most of them I thought were poorly painted and they didn't move me in any way. And then I ran into a series painted by Elizabeth Vigée Lebrun. And I loved the way she had painted Marie Antoinette. Then I read that she was Antoinette's favorite portrait painter. Then I thought, well, I'll find out a bit more about her. And so I did. Of course, she was unusual in that she was female and a huge success, even in her own time. And I became more and more fascinated with her. I read everything I could find about her. I stopped researching Marie Antoinette for the sake of finding more about the painter. And I thought then, maybe someday I'll be able to come back to this figure and imagine myself into her mind. So she continued to haunt me, even though another book has come and gone, Adam and Eve. I still felt restless about wanting to do that particular story.
Yeah. When a thorn catches in your mind like that,
yes,
it's not going to go away until you get it done the way you want to get it done.
Yes, and so of course I asked myself, okay, what is it about her and her life that's fascinating, that in some way speaks to me, and how can I capture that in fiction?
When this new novel opens, it is just before the French Revolution,
Yes.
and things are getting, well, more than tense. They're getting bloody.
Yes, they are.
And they're getting terrible. But by the time the novel moves forward,
Yes.
she is an older woman.
Yes, she lived from 1755 to 1842, was about 85 years old when she died, very old for her time. And you're right, I start telling her story at the beginning of the French Revolution.
Yeah, she's just a little girl at first.
Well, and she's there with her own little girl at the beginning of the revolution. Besides being a wonderful painter, she had a great instinct for survival, and she could feel the revolution coming, and she knew that it was time to get out of Dodge. And in fact, she left the very day that the mob marched out from Paris to Versailles, really captured the royal family and took them back to Paris. They were in a number of prisons there. My character, Elizabeth, dressed as a commoner, dressed her little daughter as a commoner, and caught a common stagecoach, not
yes.
only out of Paris, but
Right.
all the way out of France.
I remember that detail about the stagecoach. She thinks it would be a mistake to go in anything too grand. So,
Yes.
and she heads south too, doesn't she?
Yes, she goes
Yeah.
to Italy from there, and she'd always wanted to go to Italy anyway and study the great masters there of painting.
You could have written a novel about Ms. Lebrun, had you chosen to. Instead, you've had a character write her story, your character, Catherine. The book that we're talking about today is 2 novels, or
It
could
is.
have been. A character, Catherine, in Louisville, has written a novel about your character, Catherine, or
Elizabeth.
Elizabeth, in France.
Yes.
Why did you choose to do that and tell 2 fairly complicated stories in essentially alternating
Yes.
chapters?
While I wanted to write about the painter, I also was haunted by the idea that I should write something with a contemporary setting. When I used to write short stories, they were all contemporary. They were about the life around me. And I felt a calling back to the present, not the future as I did in Adam and Eve, or the past of Ahab's wife, or my other books. And so I had these 2 conflicting impulses, to write about the contemporary world and to write about this particular painter. You know, I've been on book tour a lot, and one of the questions that I'm often asked, and it's a good question, is where do you get your ideas? And there's never time to answer that fully, because you get them from so many different places, and there are always correspondences between yourself as a person and a writer and the subject matter. So I decided I would write about a writer writing about a painter. And this way I could cover the contemporary scene and also explore a subject that I think needs to be explored. I felt too that in the United States there are not a lot of good novels about artists, and that seemed a gap in the literary landscape to me. Of course, we have James Joyce, but he's Irish, Portrait of the Artist as a young man. But, I mean, it would be hard to think of a well-done novel about an American artist of any type, I think. So I always try to write where I think something is needed in the literary landscape, something that our culture is calling for and wanting to see explored.
Do you mean, more specifically, I mean, Portrait of the Artist is a writer.
Yes.
And there are novels about writers or protagonists who seem to be based on Thomas Wolfe or Ernest Hemingway or what have you. But artists themselves, painters.
Yes.
There aren't very many of those, are there?
No, no. And I did want to include the story of this woman who had been a success in very difficult times, and who had also had a difficult life in some ways. She had lost her father when she was a youngster. I myself lost my father when I was 15, and that appealed to me in a relationship with my subject.
Yeah. You were your artist-writer, Catherine, writing about your artist-painter,
Yes.
Elizabeth. For most of the book, Miss Lebrun is an older woman.
Yes.
And at the opening of the book, your writerly person is
Yes.
69 years old, a cusp of a sort.
Yes, right, it is.
And your subtitle is Portrait of the Artist as an Old Woman. So finally, it's really important to you that there be portraits of women, artists as older women. Not enough of those, huh?
I think not enough of those. You know, we're becoming increasingly aware of aging in this country as the baby boomers come up. And in a sense, I want to be encouraging to people that you can keep on being creative, you can keep on being productive. But I'm also interested in the early life of an artist too. And my historical character, Elizabeth Vigée-Lebrun, also had a great deal of encouragement from a very early age. Her father practically crowned and anointed her as an artist. He looked at her work and said, "My child, you are an artist." And that meant the world to her. She records this in her own memoirs. So having that affirmation so early on, I think, was a wonderful aid to her. Her parents were not innocent bystanders or people who objected to her doing something that girls didn't usually do. Instead, they encouraged her in every way they could.
In the court at Versailles, there were a lot of painters.
Yes.
Reading your book, I get the impression that there weren't any other women painters, or maybe no others in Paris.
There were a few other women painters. Two of them did get to be in the Academy as well. But an objection was raised to letting Elizabeth in because she was a woman. And people, you know, it was quite a big subject of conversation. And some people were saying, oh, she got in just because the Queen liked her. But
well, that's a good reason anyway. But
she
was established.
Yeah, she's a preeminent artist, and you can find her work now in the Metropolitan Museum in New York, in the Louvre, in the Hermitage in St. Petersburg, in the National Galleries of Washington, and also London, and scattered all over the United States.
Right, many places where Marie Antoinette has had no influence at all.
Yes, that's right.
So Elizabeth has made her way on her own.
Yes.
Freud and others will happily tell you that the most important thing for a girl is for her father to tell her she is pretty and valuable and can grow up to be most anything.
Yes.
In the women in your book, Elizabeth has an encouraging father, but her mother has made a bad marriage.
Yes.
She makes a bad marriage.
Yes.
Your American novelist, Catherine, has made 3 bad marriages. Well, not necessarily bad, but she has 3 divorces.
Yes.
Her friend, Leslie, has made, I will go a little farther than 2 divorces. She has made 2 bad marriages.
Yes.
There are a lot of bad marriages in your book.
Yes, that's true.
What would one conclude
Well, one could say
about the institution of marriage?
One could say there are a lot of bad marriages in America, and the statistics actually bear that out. You know, 1 out of 2 marriages ends in divorce. But I do show a good marriage in my book as well, in the contemporary part. One of the friends, or 2 of the friends of Catherine Callahan, the writer on St. James Court in Louisville, are Daisy and Daniel, who have been married for years. He's a Vietnam vet. She is a person who sells real estate, and neither of them are perfect people. They need help from each other, but they get help from each other, and it's a very loving kind of couple. It was important to include them for me in the novel because I didn't want to seem entirely cynical on the subject of marriage.
No. The novel opens with Catherine, who, let me pause for one more moment about marriage. Her success as a writer seems to injure at least her 3rd marriage. That is one of the things that you seem to indicate in the novel, in more than one place, is that men don't deal with wifely success all that well. Is that something that you think also is true in American culture and or Parisian culture?
Well, they're 2 very different cases. In the Parisian case, we're back in the 18th century. Divorce is a virtual impossibility. But my character, historically, and she says so in her own memoir, did have a marriage to someone who was a womanizer and a gambler, a spendthrift. He had a number of very unsavory characteristics, but he was always a courteous and jolly person in company. And she chose to turn her back on his less desirable features and get the best out of the marriage, and above all, not to let it interfere with her art. And to some extent, that's also true of the contemporary character, that she's gone through some painful divorces, but what's buoyed her up has been her own dedication to her art, in that case, to writing. But certainly, when we look around at successful couples, some of them are successful together, and sometimes, whether it's a man or the woman, if one succeeds spectacularly, the other, although the other may be a perfectly accomplished person, suffers from jealousy. It's rather unpredictable.
And it does work both ways. Of course
Yes,
it
it
does.
does.
Of course it does. When your novel opens in Louisville, it's almost midnight.
Yes.
She has finished and printed out her most recent novel, and she is savoring the moment.
Yes.
It is a moment of triumph. And what I was speaking of earlier with you in terms of savoring the moment, it seems to me that bad things linger, and it's tough to put them
Yes.
behind us. But triumphs are
Yes.
so evanescent.
Yes.
And your character, Rin,
Yes.
people like to call
Catherine
her
or Wren.
Rin.
Yes.
People like she's determined to savor the moment, to extend the moment, and I thought
Yes.
that was something that you meant to stick in there and make obvious to the reader.
You're absolutely right about that. I do think it's important that we reschool ourselves to enjoy our triumphs, shall we say, or just our successes. And my character has sometimes done this by buying something. She does that in conjunction with her son, who encourages her to celebrate by spending money. Of course, there are other ways to celebrate. She has a glass of wine at the very end, Pinot Noir, by the way. I think the idea of celebration, though, for me, really comes from reading Virginia Woolf. And if you think about the opening of Mrs. Dalloway is celebrating simply that she has another day to be alive in London. And she loves the hustle and bustle of it. She loves the flower shop. She loves the people she knows, even casually. And it's a great thing to be alive in Mrs. Dalloway's London.
Yeah.
And I wanted to suggest that it's a great day to be alive in Old Louisville on St. James Court, where there's a beautiful fountain to look at.
Right.
And so when my character has finished her work, in a way it begins to celebrate her life and simply being alive as well.
Right. I noticed that you began at midnight,
Yes.
and that as the 24 hours, as in Mrs. Dalloway,
Yes.
as the day moves along, bells toll and clocks tick and
Yes.
wristwatches appear. And it's clear that you may be, as you said, chucking James Joyce under the chin, but it's an homage to Virginia Woolf, isn't it?
It certainly is an homage to Virginia Woolf. It's probably the writer who's influenced me the most.
Oh.
And it does have to do with this management of time, of trying to get the essence out of the moment, or to trying to infuse the moment with some sort of essence that's precious to one. So yes, her books move deliberately. She's always playing with time as well as keeping track of actual time. In the ideal moment, one forgets time. The clock is no longer ticking. There's a sort of portal to eternity.
I started looking for them after a while. After a few bongs,
Yes.
I realized, I know where we are here. I know what we're doing. The other set of images that runs through the 24 hours is the language of flowers
Yes.
for both women, for the 18th century woman and the 21st century woman.
Yes.
Gardens and flowers and blossoms and plantings, very important.
Yes, and I suppose that does reflect my own interest in flowers and gardening. My garden is full of weeds right now because I've been traveling too much with my books to pull the weeds up. But flowers do touch me, and as I mentioned, Mrs. Dalloway starts with the idea of buying flowers, of having
Yes.
that kind of natural beauty. And the flower does represent a kind of union of the aesthetic and the natural world, I think. So, yes, I love to include flowers and try to find some language that does them justice.
Good. But a person doesn't get through the front of your title before coming to the word fountain.
Yes.
In St. James Court, there is a fountain, and the statue at the top of the fountain is Venus.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed much later there's a Venus in France as well, for
Yes.
for Elizabeth. Venus.
Venus, goddess of love and beauty, with emphasis here on beauty. So, but of course I'm thinking some of the Botticelli painting of Venus, who was born mythologically from the foam of the sea. And I just love that idea that she could have been born from the foam of the sea. But in Old Louisville, where I happen to live, there actually is a fountain of Venus rising from the sea in front of my house. So part of it was just being accurate to the location. But that fountain has been inspiring to me. I see it through my library window. All of my books since Ahab's Wife were, in a sense, inspired by that fountain.
Mm-hmm.
I love it partly because it's a combination of water and statuary. That's what a fountain can bring together. In a way, I'd say the same thing about it that I said about the flower. That's where artistry and human sense of aesthetics meets the natural world. And of course, the flowing water, the falling, spurting water always makes me think of life itself constantly moving. And yet there's this stable figure of Venus
Well, the
there
disobedience of water was
Yes, the
one
disobedience
of your
of
earliest
water.
works.
Yes, I love
And
that
at
title.
Versailles, there is
Fountains all over
water
the place.
and water and water.
Yes, and as there really are.
In the contemporary half of your novel, the characters, all of them, the blind girl, whose name is
Janie.
Janie, and her dog, and Catherine, and the neighbors and everybody, they're always walking back and forth
Yes.
around past that fountain at all
Yes.
hours of the day and night. It's the centerpiece for that whole neighborhood.
Yes, it is. And in a way, I suppose my book is meant to encourage public beauty, public statuary, and to say that it is valuable to the people who live around it, that it means something to them.
Right.
It's not the same as going to church every Sunday, but in some way it does, it provides a kind of center to one's existence to have something that beautiful around.
There's a line late in your novel, very late, in which Catherine, I think, says, not all the truths are in the Bible. There are truths to be had in literature.
That's an understatement, isn't it?
Yes. But I think one forgets.
Yes.
Literature is not just an entertainment. There's wisdom in there.
Absolutely, and that's important to me as a writer. I'm not trying simply to entertain the reader. I'm trying to make life itself deeper and wider, more meaningful.
And how will you both enlighten and entertain your reader in the next book? What is the project of the day?
Well, I'm so glad you asked. I was just thinking of it this morning as I was waking up. In fact, the idea woke me up this morning. Maybe I knew I was going to talk to you. I don't know. But, Don, I really want to write a big Civil War novel.
Oh.
This is a subject I have turned my back on all my life, being a Southerner from Birmingham, Alabama. I did write a big civil rights novel, which is the other end of that arc. But I want to go back to that subject. I don't feel that there is a big Civil War novel in our literature. Of course there is Gone with the Wind, but it's, we know, partly a romance and a very entertaining and successful one. But there's no War and Peace of the American Civil War. There's some good books that are on isolated parts of it. Cold Mountain did very well, but it's very, very narrow. And I don't like the image of women in it. There's a practical woman and a learned woman, as though you couldn't be both, which annoys me no end.
All right.
So I think that in the American literary landscape there's a gap, and it is the Civil War, although much has been written about it, documentary and otherwise. So I'd like to deal with that.
All right. Well, I will be interested in seeing your Civil War women when that happens. I know that your novel will be 400 pages long. I know it will take a little while.
It will. I'm not a fast writer.
But when you finish and I read it, we will celebrate it as we have celebrated this one.
Let's do. I can't wait.
Thank you very much, Sina. As always, a pleasure.
Thank you.
To order this season of Bookmark on DVD, call 1-800 463-8825. Additional information can be found on our website at www.alabamatv.org.